This talk will be shared by Zhao. Now let's welcome our presenter with a big hand.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Kunhi. I'm very happy to be here today and to see so many of you out here. I really appreciate your taking the time to come this weekend to hear me speak. Since I first came to Korea, a lot of Koreans don't realize that I'm a foreigner until they talk to me, and I can only stare back and say, 몰라요. So then they ask me, where am I from? And I say, I'm from Canada. Then they ask me, okay, so where are you really from? Because they think I don't look, white or what they might imagine a typical Canadian to look like. So it definitely makes sense because apparently I don't look Caucasian. Actually, people like me, where I'm from, are very common. I mean, take a look to your left and take a look to your right. And imagine one of these people sitting beside you is a foreigner. And that's what it's like in Toronto, where I'm from. So welcome to Toronto, Canada, and its multiculturalism, which is today's topic. I'd just like to say I'm no expert in this field. I'm just simply a person who lives there. So I wanted to make this a more informal presentation and just to give you some more personal perspectives about it. With that being said, I'll start off with some basic background information for those of you who aren't familiar with Toronto. I'll discuss some of the neighborhoods and some of the more popular events that take place. I'll discuss a bit about the demographics of Toronto, and then I'll look into multiculturalism and just some personal observations from everyday life, and including some challenges that are associated with living in such a multicultural city, and then I'll wrap up with some final thoughts. So let's get started and enjoy. So first of all, where is Toronto? So it's in North America, and it's situated on the northwestern shore of Lake Ontario. So these are the 5 Great Lakes. And if you can just zoom in a little bit. Okay. So actually, the word Toronto, just an interesting fact for those who don't know, it's derived from a Mohawk word. And Mohawks were Native American people who were there before it was colonized. And it means a place where trees stand in water, because the Native Americans used to catch fish by putting rods in the water in the rivers around the lake. So that's where the name came from, and it's stuck ever since. So Toronto is the provincial capital of Ontario, and as our host introduced earlier, it's the largest city in Canada with 2.6 million residents. The Greater Toronto region, so that includes suburbs, including the city Brampton, where I'm from, it actually contains 25% of Canada's entire population. So it's pretty much a very, very large area. And Toronto is the 5th largest city in North America, and because of this, it's a huge financial center, and it's very rich in educational institutions, arts, and culture. So Toronto's geography is quite unique. It's known as the city of neighborhoods because it has over 240 distinct neighborhoods. So as you can see here. In 1998, several of Toronto's metropolitan areas were consolidated into one megacity, that is Toronto. So all these little blocks before are very distinct regions with their own culture and history and inhabitants. So that's where a lot of the multiculturalism and the different resident composition comes from. So I'd like to just sort of show you some pictures of some of the most well-known neighborhoods, and I'll go into details about some of them. So here we have the Distillery District, which I'll explain a bit more about. This is Chinatown, and here's Little Italy. And here we have, so Pacific Mall, I'd just like to point out, it's not a region, but it does sort of tie in because it's a well-known area. It's a mall that a lot of people go to. And it's constructed in the style of very typical Chinese or Hong Kong malls, where all the stalls are made of glass. And a lot of Canadians who go there, they say, wow, I've never seen anything like this before. So that's just the outside of it. Here's Danforth Avenue, and I'm not sure if you recognize that language, but this is actually our Greek town area. So I'll explain a bit more about this later as well. And of course, where would we be without our Hangguk Mall? So this is Koreatown, and yes, it's very prominent there in Toronto. So I just wanted to give you a little bit more information about just a couple of the neighborhoods, just to give you a sense of what it's like. So this is called the Distillery District, and back in the 1800s or so, Canada was actually very famous for brewing beer. It still does brew a lot of beer, but back in the 1860s, one of the breweries there was actually the largest in the world. So this is where a lot of the beer was brewed, and even to this day, it's maintained a lot of its architectural designs from that era. And now you can still go, and they have a lot of microbreweries, so local, smaller, individual breweries. But to this day, it's actually evolved into a lot more. I've been there recently, and I actually go there for there's a coffee chocolate store, and you go in, and there's this huge urn, and it's just churning chocolate. So the whole place smells like chocolate, and pretty much that's my experience with the Distillery District, but it's a really nice area. So this is Greek Town, and this was the Danforth area that I talked about earlier. I just wanted to show you some of these pictures here during the daytime, because there's actually a big festival that takes place each year, and I have some personal pictures from that, but this will just show you some of the more daylight pictures. Kensington Market is actually really interesting because it's a unique mix of many different cultures all together in the same area. It's a very large artistic center. So whereas opposed to places like Chinatown, Greek Town, Little Italy, Koreatown, where it focuses on one culture, Kensington Market actually showcases many, many different cultures. As my friend, she's been there, she said, you'll have a Colombian cafe next to a Chinese bakery, next to an Indian veggie shop, and then next to a Mexican churro place, and then a shawarma restaurant. So it's really, really extensive, and as she put it, it's actually almost like mini Toronto in its own neighborhood. So I just wanted to show you guys that. I'd like to now talk about some of the events in Toronto. This is a very large component about Toronto life. Not only is it diverse socio-geographically, it's home to some of the largest festivals in North America and the world, and some of them are very unique on its own. So the Gay Pride Parade, it's not necessarily a cultural event, but it does tie in because it draws in people from all sorts of cultures. So it's celebrating homosexuality, transgender people, so it's a very liberal celebration. And I think that really ties in with multiculturalism because it reflects upon Toronto's liberal nature, not only with other cultures, but also with things such as sexuality. And actually, I had the opportunity to go this summer, so this is my picture. And I was there, and I got to experience the parade for the first time. And it was really, really something. It's a very vibrant atmosphere, and I had a lot of fun there. This is Karra. I've never actually been there myself, but it's actually very interesting. It's the largest street festival in all of North America, and it attracts up to 2 million visitors each year. It actually first started out in 1967, and it was a gift from the West Indian population as a gift to Toronto because it was Toronto's 100th birthday. We became a country in 1867, so in 1967 they put on this show as a gift to celebrate their culture and to showcase their culture for Toronto. And this is Taste of the Danforth. I went a few years ago, so there's me. I don't know if I'm really young looking or not, but this was several years ago, and this was one of the opportunities I had to go and experience one of these multicultural events. And it's just a massive, they just closed off the street, Bloor Street, part of Bloor Street actually, and you just experience a lot of Greek culture and eat a lot of food. And I don't have that many Greek friends, so this was an interesting opportunity for me. And I'd like to just focus a little bit on this picture. For those of you who don't know, some of the Canadians might know, but this was our NDP leader. So the NDP is a political party in Canada, and he was the leader, and unfortunately he just passed away this past year. But I had the honor of meeting him, and I think it was just, it's a really nice indication just to show how events like this, it's not just for cultures. You can also bring the community together, and many people come to these events. So that was really cool. So I'm glad I have this picture. Now I'd like to talk just a little bit about the demographics of Toronto. So I've shown you some of the examples, some of the neighborhoods, and for those of you who like statistics or math, this is for you. So as you can see, this is the pie graph showing the demographics of the population of Toronto. This part is over 50%, just over 50% is white. However, I'd like to just point out that all of this are the visible minorities. And visible minorities just mean you can tell that somebody is obviously not of Caucasian descent. However, this portion of the graph also includes people from European descendancy. So they actually do bring their own culture as well. Some of them might be first-generation immigrants from countries such as Ukraine or Russia or Romania. So actually this pie might be a bit larger in terms of people from other countries. So as you can see, it's a fairly large split. It's very diverse. In all of North America, or actually maybe in all of the world, Canada has the second highest percentage of foreign-born residents. The only city that has a higher population or percentage of foreign-born residents is Miami in Florida. But the vast majority of these people are of Hispanic descent. So there aren't that many other minorities that you can see at such a large scale. So I think that's one of the interesting things about Toronto's multiculturalism is that it is so evenly spread out. And of course, what goes hand in hand with your ethnicity are your languages. So just over 40% of people, and this was based on the 2006 census, 47% of the residents spoke a different mother tongue at home. Okay, so that's about half the population who speaks another language primarily. So this includes Chinese, Italian, Punjabi for South Asia, Filipino or Tagalog, and Portuguese. And I think it's just interesting with the Italian because normally if you saw an Italian, maybe you wouldn't be able to tell if they were just Canadian or Italian, and that goes back to this portion. So I would like to give you a bit of historical information. So you've seen the breakdown, you've seen where the numbers come from. Now I'd like to just talk a little bit more about how did we get here? So how did Toronto become so diverse? And the short answer is immigration. Just a little bit of history, I'll go through this quickly. But in the 1700s, the British Loyalists originally left America to settle in Canada and Toronto, and that was the first wave of immigrants. The second wave occurred after the War of 1812, so this was a big war between what was then America and then the colonies of Canada. And then a lot of English and Irish people came to Canada from the American states. And then the third wave saw a big influx of Europeans just prior to World War I. And then the fourth wave occurred around the 1960s, where a lot of people from Eastern Europe and Eastern Asia came to Canada and Toronto. The immigration laws in the 1960s encouraged foreigners to settle in Canada as it sought to increase the population. These laws have usually been very relaxed, and it's actually much easier to get a Canadian citizenship compared to many other developed countries, most notably the U.S. One thing that I found surprising was that despite these laws being very relaxed, actually the cases of illegal immigrants is not very high, just relatively speaking. So in this way, Immigration Canada still does have a very positive connotation. There aren't that many things associated with it. Canada politics usually points to 3 reasons to allow for immigration. Number 1, socially. Canada facilitates the reunification of families. So for instance, if one person is able to work in Canada, it's much easier for them to bring their family members over. So in that sense, it's almost a higher incentive for them to go and settle in Canada. A second reason is for humanitarian purposes. Canada relates to and readily admits refugees. And thirdly, economics. So because Canada is the second largest country in the world by land mass, but its population is only in total around 30 million, which is just a little over half of all of Korean population, but in such a larger space. So for that reason, they are always seeking to increase their population, and immigration is one of these ways of being able to introduce new people here. So that leads to this map. So actually, based on all of these relaxed laws and policies and the history, this shows you that Canada has the highest concentration of immigration in the world. So per capita, more people come to Canada than any other country. And a lot of it in part comes also because of how it relates back to Toronto, is that Toronto is the largest city, and usually new immigrants tend to settle in large urban areas. So in these areas, they actually do have a lot of programs to help people get established and settled in. I would like to know one thing, just as a disclaimer, is that because most people do tend to settle in large cities such as Toronto, I don't want you to get the impression that all of Canada is like that. You can drive maybe just 40 minutes, 50 minutes out of Toronto, and they have many, many small villages with populations of maybe just 1,000 or 2,000 people, and these people might never have seen a foreigner at all. So that'll lead into some challenges, which I'll discuss later. The second part of this talk, I'd just like to touch more upon multiculturalism now. And when I was first preparing for this, I said, okay, maybe I'll come up with a definition of multiculturalism, and then I realized that's really difficult. So I feel like maybe instead of just saying a few words to you, I'd like to show you with some illustrations and just some personal observations. I actually enlisted a few of my friends to help and give me their observations as well. So here's just a random pish-posh of everything then. So first of all, Toronto, you can see their multiculturalism through maybe in 2 large ways. For one, you have these large events, the ones I just showed you, where it really focuses on one culture. And the second part is just day-to-day cross-cultural interactions. Because of the high number of people from different backgrounds, you have a lot of interaction. So I went here with a few of my friends. We went and watched it, and they have all the flags up. And then after Spain won, these are some of the pictures. This is one of her streetcars, and people just took over the streets. And as my friend said, he said, you know, I never realized how many Spanish people there were until they won the World Cup. And looking at this picture, you know, I wouldn't even have guessed that this is in Toronto. I mean, you'd think it might be on any streets of the large cities of Spain. And then here are some other examples. So there are a lot of nonprofit organizations that help people get settled. So my friend told me about a couple of these organizations. Oops, sorry. About a couple of these organizations, and I think that's really interesting because it's a way for people to get settled into the country, and it helps them stay in touch with their own culture as well. Because one thing people are afraid of when they come is losing their own culture. Not only do you adopt your Canadian culture, but you're also trying to preserve some of your own culture, and it'll be interesting to see how that goes. So there are these sort of nonprofits and organizations that do help you keep in touch with your own roots. I keep doing that, sorry. So this is one of the pictures from my school's culture show. And in terms of academics and the education system, you do see a lot of multiculturalism as well. Not only just academically, you do learn a lot about Canadian history and Canadian geography, but I think one of the more important things were a lot of the extracurriculars that we're exposed to. A lot of my friends do join different societies. You can join, like the Chinese society or the South Asian society. And my high school, we do this large show each year called Culture Fest, where you can just participate with your culture and do a big show. You show your dances, we do cooking, and we have food. And it's a really interesting way to sort of see for a first-hand experience these other cultures. And these are your fellow classmates who you see day to day. Next, I'd like to talk about some challenges. So everything I've shown you at this point, I think have been really interesting, at least what I've really enjoyed. But I would be naive to say that there are no bad things or no challenges. And so obviously everything goes hand in hand like that. So I would like to address some of the challenges so that none of you are disillusioned or anything. And I think some of the challenges are really interesting because some of you might not have experienced this before, whether you come from somewhere where everybody is of the same culture, or you haven't been to a place where there's so many different cultures all together. So first of all, I think this is not just a Toronto challenge, this is a Canadian challenge, and it comes up quite frequently. We often wonder about our lack of common identity. So sometimes people wonder in Canada, what does it mean to be Canadian? Because we are this big group of people, and this includes people from the large cities, from Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, but it also extends to people from really small places. I mean, what about people from the maritime provinces, or the people from up in the territories? It almost seems like we're living in completely different worlds. So oftentimes people will always come back to this idea of saying, what does it mean to be Canadian? And I think that's one thing that we do tend to struggle with sometimes, because it's hard to find something concrete to identify with. And in that case, when you say, what does it mean to be Canadian, what can you really tell people? You say, oh, we eat beaver tails, and people think we live in igloos. It's like our national animals are the moose or beavers. But I mean, we don't have, I think, as strong of a national identity as, say, America, even though they are a country also based upon years of immigration. There's an idea of what it means to be American, but what is this idea of being Canadian? So I think that's a question that a lot of Canadians, we do ask ourselves very frequently. A second thing that I was thinking about was this idea of assimilation versus isolation. So I remember in the past, when we first started learning about multiculturalism in school, they discussed two theories. There's the idea of the melting pot. So you have this big pot, and everything kind of just goes in the pot and melts together and becomes blended together, and it's one uniform mix. And a lot of people will claim that this is what America's multiculturalism is. So when people come to America, they get assimilated to American culture, and that's why they have this strong identity of America. But in that way, maybe some people do end up losing their own cultures. The other analogy that they use to describe multiculturalism is the tossed salad bowl mix. So, when you eat salad, you have very distinct pieces. There's a tomato, there's a cucumber, there's some carrots. So they're very distinct pieces. And that's sort of more of how Canada portrays itself, is that it encourages people when they come to really hold on to their own values, to hold on to their own culture, their own language. And in theory, I think this is really great. However, there are some times where it becomes very difficult to maintain. As a personal example, so my city is called Brampton, and when I first moved there, maybe around early 2000, on my street, we were practically the only Chinese family. And then slowly, actually, a lot of white people started moving away, and a lot of Indians moved in. Brampton actually has the highest Indian population in all of Canada. So as more and more Indians and South Asians moved into Brampton, a lot of white people were moving away. And actually, you might not find this anywhere on the internet or like in the history books, but because that's where I grew up, a lot of people refer to Brampton as Browntown, and the area I lived in was called Springdale, and they would refer to it as, oh, you live in Singdale. Sing is a very common Indian last name. And then my school was called Turner Fenton, and some people would actually nickname it Turban Fenton. So these are just some of the examples of, it's sort of difficult to have all these different cultures maintaining their own and living together. And a lot of times people don't speak the language. My mother herself really, her English isn't very good. So I think when she goes out and tries to talk to people, oftentimes she feels very intimidated, and it's difficult for her to get to know people very well. She's usually very lively, and when she meets another Chinese person, she just connects better just on that common basis of language. So I think that's one of the challenges that you are faced with when you have this tossed salad analogy. The next one I'd like to talk about is the confusion about personal identity. So I know a lot of my friends and we talk about this all the time because a lot of my friends also come from different backgrounds, and we wonder, how do we stay true to our own culture, and how do we, assimilate into the Canadian culture? Because at home, you're living this one culture. I mean, I grew up eating rice with chopsticks and speaking Chinese at home. And Chinese culture and Korean culture are similar in the sense that they're very collectivist societies. So, parents sacrifice a lot for their children, and the family unit is very strong. And you're thinking about, maintaining the harmony of the group. And then when I went to Canada and in North America in general, you realize it's a very individualistic society. I read so many articles on the internet where it says, how do you become your best, or personal development, you should do this, you should follow your dreams. But, sometimes you realize, are you able to reconcile these two different trains of thoughts? What is something that you want for yourself doesn't match up with what your family wants? And then you realize, are you being selfish for not doing what your family wants and then thus betraying your own culture? Or do you feel like you won't be able to fit in with other people around you because they have this one mindset and you are of a different one? So I think that's really interesting. And even when people do ask me, I say I'm Canadian because I do believe Canada represents this mix of everybody. But a lot of times, sometimes should I say I'm Chinese? Should I say I'm Chinese Canadian? And I have friends, one of my friends, she says, she's Pakistani, but she's Canadian as well. So it's one of those things that maybe some of you might not have encountered. So just from my perspective and from a lot of people from my generation of immigrant families, that's something that we do have to consider a lot. And lastly, sometimes, when there are just different cultures, you just get this inevitable clash of differing ideas. I remember reading this article once about a Christmas tree. So a Christmas tree, you put it up during Christmas time, you put your presents underneath. But actually, one time there was a Christmas tree in a courthouse in Toronto, and they actually had to remove it because some people complained about it and said that it was a religious symbol, and their culture did not believe in Christianity, so they said, oh, we should have it removed. And then, these are things that you were just like, oh, it's just a Christmas tree. There's nothing behind it. But these are cultural sensitivity issues that you do have to just think about, and it's really kind of funny sometimes the way they do come up. And also just some of my friends I know, just in terms of younger students when we were in high school, I know a lot of Asian parents are very strict with their kids and they wouldn't let them go to sleepovers, so to stay over at another friend's house, wouldn't let them go to parties as much. But then I had some Western friends whose parents were asking them, why aren't you going to this party? It's in the field, that sounds like fun, I'll drive you there. And then, that's something that's completely different from some cultures, and it makes me wonder if that would affect social relationships between people, or if people feel like they're missing out. So, I don't mean for it to sound really bad or anything. I just wanted to give you both perspectives because there are so many good things about multiculturalism, and there are some challenges as well. So I just have a few final thoughts regarding everything that I just discussed. I am really grateful for where I've come from because I think it's really helped me increase my awareness. Because I'm able to see this display of culture and language on so many different levels, it's really helped me learn about new cultures. And even just, when you ride the bus, one time I met somebody, they were from India, but it turned out he was British Indian, so he lived in Britain for a while and then moved to the Netherlands. And these are the stories that you don't know, you wouldn't hear about until you just meet them on a day-to-day basis. And this has led me to develop a large appreciation for other cultures. And even if you are of a different culture, that doesn't mean you can't learn about others' cultures, and it doesn't mean that somebody else is not as good as your culture just because they are different. And I think a lot of it, in the end, it boils down to finding common ground with individuals. Even with this presentation, I actually sent out a message to a few of my friends, and my responses came from 3 very different people. One of them, Will, his family has been in Canada since the 1600s. And then my friend, Pao Yun, her parents were actually born in Taiwan, and my parents were born in China. So we always joke about our countries don't like each other. But when it comes down to us as individuals, this doesn't really mean anything. We just see each other as people. And my friend Alina, she was born in Pakistan, but now lives in Canada. And, I've gone over to her house, and she's Muslim, and she doesn't eat pork. So when I go there, I've eaten her food. I've actually fasted with her for one day as well. And that's something that would have never occurred to me had I not known her as an individual. And I think what I learned from this is that, what gives a culture its significance? It's really about the people, and the people are the individuals that make up this culture. So I've been very grateful to come here to Korea as well, and I've met some wonderful individuals, and they've just been so open and shown me the Korean culture here. Even though I am a foreigner, I'm different. I've eaten at people's houses and been welcomed to their friend groups and gone to their grandparents' home. And to me, that's really touching because that shows that, people anywhere are open to your culture. And so in return, I just try to teach other people about my culture as well. So I hope you learned something new today, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Thank you very much, and I'd like to also thank my boyfriend because he made this wonderful presentation for me. The PowerPoint. Yeah, so thank you very much.